Okay, that's great. We have this time for my next interview for the Zen of Teaching project. We have Jim Groom and Levine together, which is a pleasure. It's really a great honor and a privilege to have you both here at the same time and in person, because we met sometime through the networks and Twitter or blogging, etc. And we sort of have this friendship going on through the blogosphere. But now that you're here, I finally have this privilege of interviewing you two. And so let me begin asking you a couple of things. What I have in mind is the following. Both of you have worked a lot together, particularly with the famous course DS-106 and DS-106 radio. And so I want us to go into that. But first, I would like to ask you your take on the crisis, because I feel there's a lot of hyper stuff on the education crisis, and supposedly the recipe for resuscitation, which is the MOOC stuff, which MOOC and sort of you often go into that area. And then, since my project,
you might have to break your promise.
That's gonna be hard. I said I would not say the word this month.
Yeah, but it's unfortunately everywhere.
Just say gap it. I'll pull it.
Right.
I'll say MOOC.
Gap
and
it.
The
then
M
go on.
word.
Yeah, the M word is
You
what
can
I'm
never
doing.
using the M word. And last, I would like you to give me your take about the myths that you consider yourself exist on higher education, technology and learning, teaching and learning. So let's begin then the way you want to go on that. Is there a crisis?
I'm not. Are you feeling crisis, Jim?
Yeah, but it's more bodily than anything else. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's a good question, the question of crisis and where we're going with higher ed. And, you know, there's a lot of narratives you could kind of dream up around the idea of crisis. And I tend to agree that one of the crises that we're dealing with right now is the crisis of higher ed not having its own narrative, not being able to kind of cleanly and succinctly frame why it's valuable and what it does. Because I firmly do believe it's valuable. I firmly do believe that what we do in higher ed is some of the most important work happening anywhere. But I do think higher ed has kind of, in many ways, outsourced, for lack of a better word, its own mission and its own vision and its own idea. And it's let, say, Silicon Valley or some other kind of group of interests really dictate the narrative. And the narrative right now that's getting dictated to us is, we're in a crisis. Everyone's failing. And this is not now. It started back with George Bush Jr. basically saying, no child left behind. One child's left behind. The whole system's a failure. What do we need to do? We need to gut it and start charter schools. I mean, this is not a new narrative. It's a narrative of crisis. And so I think what I've been doing, or what many of us have been doing alongside with Alan, is kind of resisting the narrative of crisis and actually saying to people like, you know what? There's a lot of good people doing a lot of good stuff, and what we need to do is promote that and start framing our own narrative. And so for me, I'm with the idea that I'm optimistic. I think there's great stuff happening. I think there's an unbelievable moment for higher ed. I just think it takes some people to get around and stop completely, giving over their sense of what higher ed's about to outside industries that just want to profit off it.
And it's just way too complex a system and enterprise to say the entire system is in crisis right now.
Yeah.
So I mean, are graduates telling us we're a crisis? Are the people who can't get an education? Well, they probably can't tell us it's a crisis.
Mm-hmm.
But you looked at the cost of a higher education, and it's hard to put those curves. And whenever you see those curves, the one where they show the rise of tuition, there's a lot of data in there. I mean, it's wrapped in with everything from top tier private schools, with other schools. But the cost of to become educated going up kind of creates a crisis of opportunity.
Sure.
So for people who don't have the means to be able to either take on a lot of debt or to have it paid for them is a crisis. I mean, a crisis was some of that information recently about the amount of financial aid going to people who don't need financial aid.
Yeah.
But you don't hear much about this. So, like Jim, it feels like we're not creating this story; it's being created for us, and it's kind of interesting how we're responding. So, it's somewhat of a benefit. I mean, higher education's getting some exposure, and yeah, people are saying some things that we think are wacky, but at least they're looking at some of this mode of teaching that we've been sort of experimenting with for a long time. And whether they're going about it in a right way or a wrong way, there's lots of ways going on right now. But the way it's being painted is like it's just this one thing that's going on in terms of innovation, and it's not.
Yeah, and I agree with what Alan said. I really do. I mean, you can't ignore the question of cost. And in America, I do think that's a crisis right now in terms of who gets access to debt loan. And I think that is something we do have to rethink, and maybe technologies will help us rethink. And I do think that's why MOOCs were attractive to so many people, is that, oh wait, we have one turnkey solution that we're going to deal with to open up education to everyone, but I don't see them directly affecting cost just yet. Now, we'll see what happens with experiments like the Georgia Tech and the computer science degree for $7,000 or whatever it is, but I think, like you're saying, the MOOCs also introduced a moment where online education kind of arrived. It kind of came to us and said, it's here, it's a possibility, what have you universities done with it? And I think in some ways the crisis we're feeling at the administrative level is that, like, what have they done? How have they kind of pushed that? So as much as I still think higher ed is valuable, and I do think, Alan, you make a great point about the fact that there are some things that actually have maybe brought this narrative to the fore that we're still conceding over to other people to tell.
Right.
That makes sense.
And you just wonder sometimes, I mean, like, we have this reaction to what's being painted as the solution, and you just wonder in the general population, how do they see this?
Yeah.
Because people's comprehension of what a N-word is, or online education is really different. And there's recent surveys about how people, feel about the quality of online education. Where's that coming from? Is it direct experience? Is it what they're reading about?
Yeah.
Opinion polls are, you can get any answer you want.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I think the inflection point of crisis, like you're saying, I mean, that's the thing. It's like when you talk about crisis, what do you think about? You think of a disaster film from the 70s, right? Like glass falling on people's heads,
Right.
completely. Exactly.
Yeah, where's the the burning hulks of administrative buildings and the cars left on the roadway? It's a manufactured crisis, It may be happening, but are we seeing it?
Yeah. And are the bits and pieces where it's happening? Could a group of people get together and start dealing with the cost and start dealing with online learning in inventive ways? Yes. I firmly believe they can. We can make it more affordable, and we can make it compelling.
And the web is closing up. So how?
Well, only Alan's blog.
That's because you're not reading me, Jim.
I can't quit you.
24/7.
You won't stop blogging.
It's hard to say. I mean, you can still find incredible explosions of people finding that creative space on the web. At the same time, people focus their energy and attention into things which are semi-closed or commercial. But I mean, there's probably more content than ever. More people finding ways to make and communicate what they want to do. I mean, we talk all the time. We marvel about the gems that you find in Tumblr or everywhere. On a regular basis, I find stuff that I would have no idea is out there. And to me, the web still feels completely as an infinite space.
The serendipity of everything.
You can't wrap your hands around it. So if we say it's opening or closing, I don't know how we can even put a gauge on that.
Is it? I mean, you're younger than I am, but is it my generation, and I see your generation too, that sees this all magic, and the newer generation, do they see? Do they appreciate this bountiful
Well, I can speak for the younger generation. I'm kidding. I can't. It's just a joke.
You native.
Yeah. Me, just a 42-year-old spring chicken.
It's there's probably there's definitely a difference about people looking at it as something new, and it's easy to say, okay, people have grown up, quote unquote, immersed in this, but I've seen every age of person like get excited about something that they've been able to discover. So that and the potential for serendipity. I mean, nothing like the web, I don't think, I'm not a historian, has really ever existed to be like that. Not to be controlled or dictated by any central authority, and to be, the most open public commons we've ever had. So, frankly, in some ways, it's like, it's a miracle it's come this far.
I agree.
Yeah.
And I don't see how it could really drastically change. I don't know about all the ways that the telcos, own things and what Google might or might not be able to do. At the same time, it's not quite, as grandiose as it could be. So when you do a Google search, your Google search is different from mine.
Yeah.
So there's no absolute there.
Yeah.
And I don't spend a lot of time worrying about the dark side, but I keep it in the back of my mind out there.
Yeah.
It's there, and I mean, I think also one of the things I learned about the web is actually a presentation I gave here a few years ago, is that it has epochs now. The web itself has moments where, Flickr introduced me to the crisis after in New Orleans with Katrina. Like, I saw those dead bodies floating through Flickr, and that was a new discovery to me at once.
Yeah.
YouTube was an epoch, right? And like Wikipedia is an epoch. The whole moment with Napster was an epoch. So, like, you start to see that the web itself, because it's an open platform, can define and redefine what it is. And I think now maybe, and I can't speak for them, but there's probably people who kind of assume the web. They assume access to all this information we didn't have. So maybe why it seems so magic to us. But that part of the magic will change, because they've always thought you have access to every clip you ever wanted on film. And I think if you grew up in the 70s, you're like, what? No, like, you can't do that. So there's maybe a little bit more magic for us because of pure access. But at the same time, I do think that they're probably accessing senses of cultures and kids all around the world that is still magical to them. And it's magical in different ways.
And it's a moving target. I mean, we're in this moment now, but, the half a generation that comes after this current one that we're talking about, they're going to do stuff that'll blow this current generation. So we're always
going that road.
Yeah.
Right. So your work with DS-106 is already a work that has a number of years, right? That began when?
It's almost 4 years old.
4 years old. Wow.
I mean, the whole experience.
The whole experience.
It's it'll be 4 years old this January.
Yeah, wow.
Isn't that crazy to think of?
Yeah, that's really
Like my son. I actually timed DS-106 because my son was born in December, and people started making gifts for the class 4 days later.
That's a nice.
It really was
frame.
almost that quick. So.
Yeah. So tell something about that. What in your way? What is it that you're doing that builds that narrative that you were talking before? No.
I do think, that gets back to that narrative. That's a really good segue between what we were talking about earlier. Like, I think DS-106 defines the narrative in that it re-centralizes the idea of education. And maybe that's the wrong term. It decentralizes the idea of education akin to the web. So give students and give even faculty members the ability to control their own space and build their own senses of narratives, or even contribute assignments, and actually kind of create a hub where that happens and whereby you can create community. Because I think when I think about the web's not dead, it's like, yeah, the web's not dead when you look at communities like the knitting community Ravelry or Reddit. There's a community on Reddit, whether it's pernicious at times or not. There's people there who are sharing and are doing amazing stuff. And I think DS-106 is kind of an instantiation of that in higher ed. Like, why can't we create communities like that get people excited about learning how storytelling is changing in the digital age, but also about how they can actually be agents of their own change, agents of creating the web, agents of building and designing. And so for me, that's kind of been the long story of DS106, and I think it's what we've been working together a lot to kind of think about, both abstractly and very concretely, which is another thing I love about DS106. It is concrete about what that would look like. We both, Alan, much longer than me, come from a history of educational technology or designing spaces and working with faculty, so it only makes sense that we would make a little kind of, a fracture from some of that and start experimenting with it on our own.
And some of my favorite parts in it are the ones that we never planned. And so it's got this potential to do more. So it kind of sets up the party. Well, party's maybe not the right atmosphere.
Yeah.
But you invite people in, and it's what they bring to it. So the radio station wasn't in the original plan. The Daily Crate was something we riffed from elsewhere. And in smaller cases, right now going on, some people on their own decided to say, animated GIFs are interesting. I wonder if we can create a spontaneous narrative where people contribute one after the other.
Yeah.
Did it completely on their own, so the course doesn't necessarily have to, or the instructors don't really have to define the entire experience. People really make the experience, and there's not too many places where that happens. There's the communities of interest, and you could say this is like that, and everybody knows that communities of interest really generate high levels of engagement because people go there with that interest baked in. DS106, a lot of people enter not knowing what they're getting into, and they just find that they unlock, I never edited sound before, or I never created a GIF, or I never really did much work with layering things in imagery. So I like most when people, they kind of break out of what they know and discover what they don't know how to do.
Yeah, and Alan recently did a great presentation at Mary Washington where he talked about all the teachers who actually affected him. And they put faces to names. It reminded me a lot of Fellini's Amicord, where he goes back to his home in Rimini and he sees all these amazing teachers and it's just amazing kind of intimacy of that learning experience. And I think one of the things that excites me about DS106 is I feel the intimacy of people. I feel that this is a class full of a network of people all over the world, and that when they come and do something or they contact you on Twitter or on their blog or in a comment, it's people interacting in a learning community, which is what we're trying to reproduce online make online learning like authentic and powerful and meaningful. And it has to start by rethinking the medium. And I think we've kind of had a lot of luck in DS106 because there's a lot of people in our community who are engaged and who want to do that. And it's been exciting to kind of think that it's one of many models. And what's exciting is that DS106 is not the model. It's not like, that was the problem with the MOOC, right? It's like, here's the model, it's solved. Get on board, or you're, a Luddite. No, it's that we didn't come to this saying we can proliferate models because we're higher ed and we can experiment and we don't have to respond to venture capital and we can imagine. And DS106 is just an example of that. Like, I'm ready to see 5 million more. And so 5 million students or 10 million students can have X amount of experiences. But maybe what's at the heart that can be abstracted out from that is the modeling of community, is the building of a kind of space where students become nodes on a distributed web of possibility. And I think that's kind of a new design approach. Like, we're not saying, well, Gardner's hype cycle or the scale would say, or who's the one, Howard someone. Like, there's always some theorist that educationalists bring to this that completely kills the experience. It's like, if you bring up a theorist, let me run the other way so I can actually enjoy myself.
That's why no one's brought a theorist to his jam.
That's right, exactly.
Well, and the community part is usually, it's initially like a thing that gets glommed on. Okay, we got this course experience, we got videos and lectures, oh, we have a discussion board over there.
Yeah.
From the beginning, the community was what seeded it.
Yeah.
And it's outside of our bounds. So we thought Twitter was a great place to start community. We didn't say that has to be the community.
Yeah.
So a couple months ago, someone said, a lot of us like Google+. All right, go create your community there. Someone commented somewhere like, I think we should have one on LinkedIn. I don't really understand that, but if people want, that's the way to me, like, I mean, communities really get built that way. They don't happen where you design them.
Yeah.
You know, where I live in Phoenix, they have this concept called master plan communities. And that means they put up walls around something and there's a guard gate and every house inside looks the same.
That's right.
And it's like, I mean, that's not where communities in Brooklyn happen, right? It happens where people gather. And they're going to gather maybe in places you didn't expect them to gather.
Yeah, and rather than resist it, you know, build it into your whole ecosystem of an online experience. Like, there's no problem. And even like, while I don't like the LMS, I don't enjoy it, I feel better when it's not around. I'm not against someone using that, but also understand that there's a whole web out there that you can integrate in. And I would think good design in this day and age would allow you to bring the web in seamlessly, and vice versa. And I think a lot of where the thinking that DS-106 has spurred in me is the idea that, you know, yeah, this is a cool model. And what if we could start doing it not on a class basis, but on a university basis, so that you start aggregating in all the great stuff happening around the university and all the people, or even statewide. All the public schools of Virginia can show off the work happening and like really start to open up education so that the public work happening is out, open, and exposed so that we can all benefit. So that our first result in Google for Mark Twain isn't, you know, some kind of, you know, ad for buying a Mark Twain book that has no relevance to anything interesting that would get a kid excited about Mark Twain. It's actually, you know, University of Mary Washington's a group of students put together an awesome resource on Mark Twain. You know, right up there with Wikipedia, because I don't have a problem with Wikipedia, but I think that we as universities could actually populate the open web with great stuff. And I think DS-106 is a perfect example. Just do an image search for DS-106 in Google, and it's like,
Yeah. Oh, wow.
wow, this is not like, you know, we didn't have a marketing company come in and Alan and I sit down with them and Martha Burtis and Tom Woodward and say, here's our strategy. We want to look like a very, like, you know, professional class where people can get paid, and when they take it, it's like,
And what people
they
are,
need to find it.
I mean, we wonder sometimes, I mean, how are these courses costing millions of dollars to produce?
Yeah.
So you never hear about it, but you know that they've got lots of people and are doing high-end video production.
Yeah.
You know, if you want to get down to the cost of doing this, I
Yeah.
mean, we're pretty
Yeah.
cheap, Jim.
Right. And it's like you would think the YouTube revolution would have established that. Like,
Yeah.
it's like all this happened. YouTube got, you know, billions and billions of views. And then universities say, no, we have it figured out. We're going to do MOOCs and we're going to do high-end video that costs you $100,000 to $200,000, and the university pays for that. Not even the MOOC company. So it's like,
And they're dull.
they
Some of them.
suck.
Quite a few
They
of them
suck.
do. Yeah.
They're not interesting, and these are amazing lecturers. This is not about the intellectuals.
Yeah.
This is about the complete lack of imagination when it comes to sharing out through this media.
It's very interesting that the inverse of the S106 in a way can be said of these sort of MOOCs that are, and the way it seems very weird to me that the way they're built is so distant from the Siemens original
Yeah.
idea.
Yeah.
I think that happened, the same thing that happened with EduPunk. The EduPunk idea, it sort of got stolen away. I don't know if I can use that word, but it's in a way what I think. No, it gets
But you know,
owned
the-
by.
Yeah. The name got taken, but the spirit didn't get taken.
That's right.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I think it's important that you bring that up because, you know, MOOCs do have a history that seemed like, you know, I loved it when Clay Shirky was like, and when Stanford invented the MOOC, it was like, you know, a lot of people love Clay Shirky and that's fine, but it's like, do some basic research.
Yeah, exactly.
And the other thing there too is it's like, you know, I remember when Siemens and Downs in 2008, 2009, and maybe even Wiley and Kuros before them were doing this open classrooms and inviting anyone who would like. You know, they weren't massive numbers yet. It's George and Stephen and Dave Cormier who started to get that massive. And I remember seeing that at 2,000, 3,000 people.
2,000 or 3,000, yeah.
And being like, even at that moment, like, why? Like, why 2,000 or 3,000? And I understand the way Downs frames it, and even Siemens, it's like because people need to create their own networks and do that, and they're not doing this for credit, or the 25 people who are, and that's fine. And I feel similarly about DS-106. You're gonna have 50 or 25 people doing it for credit, and then maybe 1,000 or 2,000 doing it because they want to.
No, and the thing is that when you have huge numbers of people, you get different reactions, different dynamics.
Yeah.
And the good idea is, how do you use those new dynamics? How do you experiment around that? And this is what I think.
But they're not using that dynamic.
No,
it's
with-
basically
with the-
everybody in the
MOOCs,
MOOC
no.
marches along.
Yeah.
They're all getting the same thing.
Yes.
It's week 2. Everybody does the same thing.
You
and that's-
remember the Apple commercial 1984?
Yeah,
That
yeah.
reminds me exactly.
Well, it's also interesting. It's like you have that, and the massive part of it. What they argued was about getting this data, so you could get analytics, so you could find out, and that brings us down the same road of Google. And I hope we've learned a little in the 10 years since we thought Google could do no evil.
Mm-hmm.
That if you start giving over all your data and all your analytics to an outside company, and you expect them to always have your interests in mind, you're going to be disappointed. And that's the whole idea of DS 106. Is another kind of virtue of it is show students how to use the web, show them how to interrogate it, show them how to own it. Let them take control of it and then decide if they want another company to own their data. Right now, we're not having those conversations at the university level. They're just not happening.
Well, you're helping that to happen with the UMW blog and the initiative that somehow helps faculty to develop that conscience, that awareness.
I would hope. I mean, you don't always do that successfully, but I'd hope we do that.
You'd think,
To
but
some degree.
I mean, you see so many places that could be doing it and they're not.
And they're not.
Or they say we can't.
Yeah.
And I think there's a fair amount of institutional inertia.
Yeah, and what's that? And that inertia. I mean, we all know it, but how you could overcome that inertia?
I mean, it happened I'll try to extrapolate what happened at Mary Washington, but there was a spirit of experimentation and a room to say, what if? Like, we're not expecting everybody at UMW in 2005 to start this.
Sure.
So it's that's how innovation happens in these small groups. And a lot of our colleague institutions elsewhere, those groups that used to do a lot of this stuff, they're kind of implementers now. They support the LMS or they support the Google apps. And so where are the places where people are tinkering? There's a lot of it going on, and I think it's easy to lose sight of that. So, I know when I participate in these activities online and I get to hear what individual faculty are doing or individual colleagues, sometimes on their own time and dime, there's a huge amount of innovation going on, but it's not always supported directly within the institution. Certain people will do it just because.
Yeah.
And that's okay, but that doesn't really help other people who have the ideas.
I agree. And, there's a technologist out at Washington State University, Vancouver, Mike Caulfield, who wrote a recent comment on someone's post that just reminds me in this moment. He's like, one of the things he found remarkable about, say, a community like UMW, University of Mary Washington's Division of Teaching and Learning Technology, or the school in general, is that it's a group that didn't do the tech crunch. Like, it didn't go, new technology, Apple iPads, all your resources, new this, all resources. Like, that's the problem right now. There's a culture right now, whatever is new, jump on it, push it. And I believe that you should be experimenting there. But if your group is not operating, or your campus is not operating from an ethos, that you believe in something, whatever it is, like open education or faculty, this should be a tool that allows faculty to imagine and augments the process of teaching and learning. If you don't have some clear, focused ethos that you can work to over time,
if you don't empower faculty, give their time, give their resources, etc., and narrative,
and the companies are going to come in and fill the void. So I think a lot of this is a kind of intellectual and also vision void. We were lucky. We had a vision. Gardner Campbell kind of set us on a path that we could follow. And there's a lot of groups that are looking for that. And sometimes it's not a technological problem and the cultural problem, and people say, well, we could never do it in this culture. It's like, well, why not? If you have people who are excited and you have a clear vision and you remain the course, right? Like, you remain true, I don't think it's impossible. And I just think it's crucial. Like, I just think it's important that people do that, just to be like, I want to work at a place where I feel like I have agency, not where someone's saying, come in and make sure Blackboard works. If that would happen, I'd be out of this field, 10 years ago. I mean,
We have to be more pushers of this agenda, because
Yeah.
if you ask students like what they would, if they could design their own higher ed experience, they'll want something that's faster, easier, and cheaper, right?
Yeah.
I mean, anybody would. I mean, who wouldn't? And who's going to set the bar for them to kind of challenge them to do more than they naturally want to do on their inclination? If I had to design my own undergraduate major, I would have never taken art history.
Yeah.
I would have never taken a photography course. But because a simple thing as a requirement of an elective opened my mind some, and we need to be more than just some funneling track for people to get jobs. That's not what education's about.
And it's a dangerous vision. I mean, if that is, Audrey Waters recently gave a talk. So she's a journalist, talks a lot about ed tech, and she gave a talk about the 10 possible futures of the 10 universities standing. Not the 10 futures, the 10 universities left.
Because Sebastian Thrun said in 2050 there'll only be 10 universities left.
And so
And
like,
Udacity will
when
be.
did he say that?
He said it about 2 weeks ago, and Udacity will be one of them, which
Yeah.
Audrey shut down.
Yeah, and then the University of Walmart was one, the University of Google
University
was
of Google,
one.
yeah.
And it was, it was a provocative thought
Yeah.
and a provocative talk, but it also gets to the point that David Wiley, who's done a lot of work with open content and open education more generally, kind of like the godfather of the whole thing. He said, frankly, there's going to be a huge explosion in population, and there's a huge space that's going to be essential for universities right now to be experimenting with online learning and stop accepting what these companies are giving them. You're the professional. Act like one. Do some work. Imagine the space. Enough.
I love
The
that.
companies are not helping us in this regard. They can maybe start to systematize and enterprise-wide some of our innovations, but step out of the way of understanding what teaching and learning is unless you really do.
And if you put aside all the claims for educating the world for free and spreading it around the world, the bottom line, Coursera has to make money.
Yeah.
I mean, that is the prime driver. If they don't make money, they're out of business.
Yeah. And the thing is we realized recently with Coursera, and it will be with all MOOCs, is that they actually have a business model. It's to give state universities or any university will buy access to their system, which sounds a lot like an LMS. There's no different. It's sheep's in new clothing.
It's very, very,
Or
very
whatever,
dangerous.
the wolf in sheep's clothing, or
And Georgia Tech is
with people's money.
Yeah. And Georgia Tech is going to be taking the intellectual ideas of their computing science faculty, giving it to Udacity to turn around and sell to other people. When has anybody ever signed up for that? Okay, you can. Faculty most of all abhor the idea of someone taking their ideas, and they're selling it for cheap.
yeah, they're giving it away.
Yeah.
It's like the George Orwell thing. Like they're gonna take Big Brother's gonna take our information. It never had to happen. We just gave it away, and we just keep giving it away, and it's a shame. It's it reminds me of the King Lear. Right? When King Lear, the problem with King Lear and why he finds himself in a hovel at the end of that play, miserable, is that he gave away his kingdom way too soon to his daughters. His daughters could be considered like Coursera, Udacity, and Cordelia is the only good one. Cordelia's open in tech.